The key turned in the lock like it always had, but something felt wrong the moment I stepped through the doorway. The silence hit me first, not the comfortable quiet of a home waiting for its owner, but the hollow echo of a place that had been stripped bare. My name is Eddie Banks, and I'd been gone 6 months working an international car auction contract in Germany. Good money, steady work, and a chance to see some of the finest restored classics in Europe. I'd left my wife Julie with a full house, a joint bank account, and what I thought was a solid marriage of 8 years. Now I stood in what used to be our living room, staring at dust outlines on the hardwood floor where our furniture once sat. The entertainment center. Gone. The leather couch Julie had insisted we buy vanished. Even the coffee table her mother gave us was nowhere to be seen. What the hell happened here? I muttered, my voice bouncing off bare walls. I walked through each room like a man touring a crime scene. The kitchen cabinets hung open, empty except for a few mismatched plates. Our bedroom had been cleared out completely. No dresser, no nightstands, not even the lamp Julie used for reading. The closet showed empty hangers swaying slightly from the air conditioning vent. My workshop in the basement told the same story. Tools I'd collected over 15 years of restoration work, gone. The vintage snap-on toolbox my Navy buddies had chipped in to buy when I started my business, vanished. Even my collection of classic car magazines had disappeared. I pulled out my phone and checked our joint account. The balance showed $247.83. When I'd left, there had been over $12,000 saved up from my overseas contract advance. A text message notification popped up. From Julie, "Don't bother coming back. Papers are filed. You'll hear from my lawyer." I stared at the message for a long moment, then started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that comes from finding something funny, but the bitter sound a man makes when he realizes he's been played for a complete fool. A knock at the front door interrupted my moment of revelation. I opened it to find Mrs. O'Reilly, our 70-something neighbor who knew everything that happened within a 3-block radius. "Eddie dear, you're back," she said, clutching a flowered housecoat around her thin frame. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Mrs. O'Reilly." "Yeah, just got in. Seems like I missed some excitement around here." Her weathered face creased with what might have been sympathy or gossip-fueled excitement. "Oh, honey, you missed more than excitement. That wife of yours had a moving truck here the day after you left for Germany. Big strapping fellow helping her load your things." "Big strapping fellow?" "Chad something or other. Drives one of those fancy sports cars. Real estate type from what I heard Julie telling Brittany. They were out on the front lawn, bold as brass, directing those movers like they owned the place. Brittany Hill, Julie's best friend since college. If Brittany knew, then this had been planned for months." "Did you happen to see which direction the truck went, Mrs. O'Reilly?" She smiled, and I could tell she'd been waiting for this question. "Well, I might have followed them in my car, just to make sure they weren't stealing from you, you understand. They went to one of those storage places on Route 9, big orange signs." I thanked Mrs. O'Reilly and watched her shuffle back to her house, probably already planning how to spread this story through the neighborhood network. Then I walked to my garage, hoping against hope that my 1967 Mustang would still be there. The garage door rolled up to reveal empty space where my car should have been. But there, tucked under a paint can on my workbench, was something Julie had apparently missed. A receipt from Secure Storage Solutions on Route 9. Unit 47B, paid through the end of the month. I grabbed my truck keys from the hook by the kitchen door. At least she'd left me the beat-up Ford pickup I used for parts runs. Probably figured it wasn't worth stealing. As I drove toward Route 9, my mind started working through the implications. Julie hadn't just left me. She'd systematically emptied our life together while I was 3,000 miles away, earning money I thought was for our future. The timing was too perfect, too complete. This wasn't a sudden decision or an affair that got out of hand. This was a planned operation. The storage facility sat behind a chain-link fence, rows of orange metal buildings stretching back from the main office. I parked near the entrance and studied the layout. Unit 47B would be in the third building, probably accessible from the back where fewer people would notice activity. I had two choices: walk into the office and try to convince them to let me into a unit I wasn't listed on, or find another way to see what Julie had stashed there. Given that she'd cleaned out our bank account and apparently hired a lawyer, I doubted the legal approach would work. The sun was setting, and most of the day shift customers had cleared out. I drove around to the back of the facility and parked behind a dumpster. A 10-minute walk brought me to Building C, and a few more minutes of searching located Unit 47B. The lock was a standard padlock, nothing fancy. I pulled out my phone and called Tommy Rodriguez, a 22-year-old kid who worked part-time in my restoration shop and had a talent for getting into things that were supposed to stay closed. "Eddie, man, you're back. How was Germany?" "Educational. Listen, I need a favor. Can you meet me at the storage place on Route 9? And bring your special tools." Tommy had learned lock-picking from his grandfather, who'd been a locksmith for 40 years. The kid could open most standard locks in under 2 minutes. "Sure thing, boss. Everything okay?" "I'll explain when you get here." While I waited, I walked the perimeter of the storage facility, noting the security cameras and guard patterns. The place was designed more to keep people from driving off with entire units than to prevent someone from quietly opening a lock after hours. Tommy arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a small leather pouch that contained his picks and tension tools. He was a good kid, smart, reliable, and loyal to the people who treated him right. "So what's the story, Eddie?" I gave him the short version while he examined the lock on Unit 47B. His expression grew darker as I explained about the empty house and cleaned-out bank account. "That's messed up, man. Julie always seemed nice." "Yeah, well, apparently I'm not the best judge of character." Tommy had the lock open in 90 seconds. "There you go, boss. Want me to stick around?" "Might be better if you head out. I'll handle it from here." He nodded and packed up his tools. "Hey, Eddie, if you need anything else, just call. That lady did you wrong." After Tommy left, I rolled up the metal door of Unit 47B and stepped inside. A battery-powered lantern sat just inside the entrance. Julie had been prepared for evening visits. I clicked it on and surveyed the contents. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My tools were there, neatly organized on metal shelving. My car magazines, my Navy memorabilia, even the vintage Mustang parts I'd been collecting for years. But mixed in with my belongings were things that told a different story. Julie's clothes hung on a portable rack, expensive dresses I'd never seen before, shoes that cost more than most people's car payments. A small desk held a laptop and a stack of papers. I opened the laptop and found it password protected, but the papers were more revealing. Real estate listings for luxury condos, bank statements for an account I'd never heard of, showing regular deposits over the past 8 months. And at the bottom of the stack, a folder labeled Divorce Strategy in Julie's handwriting. Inside the folder were printouts of emails between Julie and her lawyer, discussing how to maximize her settlement by claiming I'd abandoned the marriage. There were also photographs, pictures of me at various bars and restaurants in Germany, taken from social media posts I'd made. The lawyer's notes suggested using these to paint me as someone who preferred traveling to being a husband. But the most interesting item was a letter from Chad Foster, the big strapping fellow Mrs. O'Reilly had mentioned. It was a love letter, dated 3 weeks after I'd left for Germany, but it referenced months of waiting and finally being free to be together. I photographed everything with my phone, then carefully returned the papers to their original positions. But I did take a few items that belonged to me: my grandfather's Navy compass, a photo of my parents, and my collection of vintage car keys. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something else: a small box tucked behind some of Julie's shoes. Inside were more photos, these showing Julie and Chad in various romantic poses. Some were taken in what looked like our house, in our bedroom, on our furniture. The timestamps on the photos went back almost a year. I closed the storage unit and replaced the lock, but not before making one small modification. Tommy had taught me a trick for jamming locks, so they'd open once more but then break permanently. Julie would be able to get in one more time, but after that, she'd need bolt cutters. The drive back to my empty house gave me time to think. Julie hadn't just cheated on me. She'd been planning this exit for months, maybe longer. She'd used my overseas contract as cover to move in with Chad and systematically strip our life together of anything valuable. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd left evidence, and she'd underestimated what a man with nothing left to lose might do with that evidence. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house where I'd thought I was building a future. The windows were dark, and the lawn was already showing signs of neglect. It looked like what it was, a place that had been abandoned. My phone buzzed with another text from Julie. "Hope you enjoyed your little European vacation. Time to face reality." I typed back, "Reality is about to get very interesting." Then I deleted her number and started making plans. The next morning, I drove to my restoration shop on the south side of town. Banks Classic Auto occupied a converted warehouse space I'd been renting for 5 years, and it was the one part of my life Julie hadn't been able to touch. The business was in my name alone, established before we got married, and she'd never shown much interest in the day-to-day operations. Manny Castellanos, my business partner and oldest friend, was already there when I arrived. We'd served together in the Navy, and he'd followed me into the car restoration business when we both got out. Manny was built like a fire hydrant, short, solid, and impossible to move when he set his mind to something. "Eddie, about time you showed up. How was Germany?" "Educational," I said, using the same word I'd given Tommy. "But I think I learned more coming home than I did over there." Manny looked up from the engine he was rebuilding, a 1969 Camaro SS that belonged to a collector in Boston. "That doesn't sound good. Julie giving you trouble?" I filled him in on the situation while we worked. Manny listened without interrupting, but I could see his jaw getting tighter as the story progressed. He'd never been Julie's biggest fan, mainly because she'd made it clear she thought he was a bad influence on me. "So what's the plan?" he asked when I finished. "First, I need to know more about this Chad character. Then I need to figure out exactly what they took and where it ended up. You want me to do some digging?" Manny had connections throughout the city. Guys who worked construction, drove trucks, tended bar, and generally saw everything that happened in town. If Chad Foster was as prominent as he seemed to think he was, someone in Manny's network would know about him. That would help. But keep it quiet for now. I don't want them knowing I'm asking questions. "Got it. What else?" I showed him the photos I'd taken at the storage unit. "Julie's been planning this for months. She's got a lawyer, a new place to live, and apparently a whole new wardrobe. But she also left a trail. Sloppy. Or overconfident. Maybe she figured I'd just roll over and accept it." Manny snorted. "She obviously doesn't know you very well." Tommy arrived around 10, and I put him to work researching Chad Foster online. The kid was good with computers, and within an hour, he had a comprehensive profile of Julie's new boyfriend. Chad Foster, age 41, owns Foster Development Group, Tommy read from his laptop screen, specializes in buying older houses, renovating them, and flipping them for profit, drives a 2023 Porsche 911, lives in a condo downtown, and apparently thinks he's God's gift to women based on his social media posts. What kind of social media posts? The usual stuff. Pictures of his car, his condo, expensive restaurants, but also a lot of photos with different women. This guy gets around. I studied the screen over Tommy's shoulder. Chad Foster looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for the role of smug real estate developer. Perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of smile that said he'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Any pictures with Julie? Not on his public profiles, but look at this. Tommy pulled up Chad's business website. Foster Development Group had an impressive portfolio of renovated properties, all photographed professionally and priced well above market value. But what caught my attention was the About section, which mentioned Chad's expertise in maximizing property values through strategic improvements and market timing. He's a flipper, I said. Buys low, renovates cheap, sells high. Yeah, and according to this article in the local business journal, he's been very successful at it. Made over $2 million in profit last year alone. That explained Julie's interest. She'd always been attracted to money and status, and her real estate job put her in contact with wealthy clients regularly. Chad probably seemed like a significant upgrade from a guy who spent his days covered in motor oil. My phone rang. Mrs. O'Reilly. Eddie, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. But I saw that Julie girl at the grocery store this morning, and I thought you should know what I overheard. What did you hear, Mrs. O'Reilly? She was talking to that Brittany friend of hers, and they were laughing about how you probably didn't even realize what was happening while you were in Germany. Julie said something about Eddie being too trusting for his own good, and how she'd been planning her exit strategy for months. Anything else? Well, Brittany asked if you'd found the storage unit yet, and Julie said it didn't matter because everything there was legally hers according to the divorce papers. Then she said something about having insurance in case you tried to make trouble. Insurance. That was interesting. I thanked Mrs. O'Reilly and hung up. What kind of insurance? Manny asked. Good question. Tommy, can you dig deeper into Julie's online activity? Social media, shopping accounts, anything that might show what she's been up to? I can try, but I'll need her passwords. I thought about that. Julie had always been careless with computer security, using the same password for multiple accounts. Her favorite was Realtor 2019, the year she got her license and started making serious money. Try Realtor 2019 for everything. If that doesn't work, try variations with her birthday or our anniversary. While Tommy worked on that, Manny made some phone calls. His first contact was a guy named Pete who worked for a moving company. Pete, it's Manny. I need some information about a job you might have done about 6 months ago. Woman named Julie Banks, moving stuff out of a house on Maple Street. I could only hear Manny's side of the conversation, but his expression told me Pete remembered the job. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's the one. Where did you take the stuff? Okay, and who paid for it? Interesting. Thanks, Pete. I owe you one. Manny hung up and turned to me. Pete's company moved Julie's stuff to Chad Foster's condo downtown. But here's the interesting part. Chad paid for the move, and he specifically requested that they come back the next week to pick up more items. More items. Pete said they made 3 trips total. First trip was furniture and clothes. Second trip was electronics and personal items. Third trip was tools and what looked like car parts. So Julie hadn't just taken our shared belongings, she'd systematically looted my personal workshop and hobby collection. Items that had no value to her but were worth thousands of dollars to the right buyers. Tommy, any luck with Julie's accounts? Got into her Facebook and Instagram, and Eddie, you're going to want to see this. He turned the laptop toward me. Julie's Instagram account, which had been relatively modest when I left for Germany, now showed a completely different lifestyle. Expensive restaurants, luxury shopping trips, professional spa treatments. And in several photos, I could see Chad in the background, or reflected in mirrors, but the timestamps told the real story. The first photo showing her new lifestyle was dated just 4 days after I'd left for Germany. She didn't waste any time, Manny observed. Look at this one, Tommy said, pointing to a photo of Julie wearing a necklace I'd never seen before. The caption read, "When someone appreciates the real you, new beginnings worth the wait." The hashtag, worth the wait, suggested she'd been planning this transition for longer than I'd suspected. Can you see who's been liking and commenting on these posts? Yeah, mostly her real estate friends, and some people I don't recognize. But Brittany's been very active. Look at this comment thread. Tommy showed me a conversation between Julie and Brittany under a photo of Julie at an upscale restaurant. Brittany had written, "About time you upgraded. Eddie never took you anywhere this nice." Julie's response, "Some people are worth waiting for. Others are just practice." I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't just that Julie had left me. It was the casual cruelty of how she talked about our 8 years together. Like I'd been some kind of temporary arrangement while she waited for something better to come along. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Eddie, this is Chad. We should talk. Meet me at Donovan's bar tonight at 8. Come alone." I showed the message to Manny and Tommy. "That's either very brave or very stupid," Manny said. "Maybe both, but I think I'll take him up on it." "You want backup?" "No," he said, "come alone, but keep your phone on, just in case." Donovan's bar was an upscale place downtown, the kind of establishment where Chad would feel comfortable and in control. It was also public enough that nothing too dramatic was likely to happen. I spent the rest of the day working on the Camaro and thinking about what Chad might want to discuss. The most likely scenario was that he wanted to negotiate some kind of settlement, maybe offer to return some of my belongings in exchange for a quiet divorce. But there was another possibility. Maybe Chad was starting to realize that Julie came with more complications than he'd bargained for. At 7:30, I cleaned up and drove downtown. Donovan's was busy with the after-work crowd, mostly young professionals and real estate types. I spotted Chad immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, wearing an expensive suit and checking his phone constantly. I walked over and sat down without being invited. "Chad Foster, I presume." He looked up, and I got my first close look at Julie's upgrade. Chad was handsome in a generic way, with the kind of features that photographed well but didn't leave much of an impression in person. His handshake was firm but brief, like he was afraid I might be contagious. "Thanks for coming, Eddie. I thought we should clear the air." "Clear the air about what? The fact that you've been sleeping with my wife for the past year? Or the fact that you helped her steal everything I owned?" Chad's composure slipped slightly. "Look, I know this is awkward, but Julie and I didn't plan for things to happen this way. Sometimes people just connect, you know?" "Connect? Is that what we're calling it?" The waitress came over and Chad ordered an expensive scotch. I asked for a beer, something local and unpretentious. "Eddie, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Julie's filed for divorce, and frankly, it's better for everyone if we can work this out without lawyers getting too involved." "Work what out?" "Well, there might be some confusion about which belongings belong to whom. Julie's willing to return anything that's clearly yours, as long as we can reach an understanding." I took a sip of my beer and studied Chad's face. He was nervous, which was interesting. A man who was completely confident in his position wouldn't have asked for this meeting. "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where you don't make trouble for Julie's career or try to complicate the divorce proceedings. She's worked hard to build her reputation in this town." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, you get your tools back and we all move on with our lives." I leaned back in my chair. "That's a generous offer, Chad. But I'm curious about something. How long have you and Julie been planning this little arrangement?" "We haven't been planning anything. Like I said, it just happened." "Really?" "Because I found some interesting photos in that storage unit. Photos that suggest you two have been connecting for quite a while." Chad's face went pale. "You broke into the storage unit?" "I retrieved some of my own belongings. Amazing what people leave lying around when they think nobody's watching." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos I'd taken. The letter he'd written to Julie, with its references to months of waiting. "This is your handwriting, isn't it, Chad?" He stared at the photo for a long moment, then finished his scotch in one gulp. "What do you want?" "I want my life back, but since that's not possible, I'll settle for making sure you and Julie face some consequences for what you've done." "What kind of consequences?" I smiled and stood up. The kind that happen when people realize they're not as smart as they think they are. I dropped a 20 on the table and walked out, leaving Chad sitting alone with his expensive scotch and his expensive problems. The real work was about to begin. The next morning, I put the first phase of my plan into motion. Julie had made one crucial error in her strategy. She'd assumed I would react emotionally and make mistakes. Instead, I was going to treat this like a military operation, gather intelligence, identify targets, and execute with precision. My first stop was the courthouse, where I filed a motion to freeze our joint assets pending a full accounting of marital property. It was a standard legal move, but it would prevent Julie from moving any more money around while I built my case. Then I visited my lawyer, Jim Morrison, not the singer, as he was fond of pointing out. Jim had handled the legal work when I started my business, and he knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't the type to make wild accusations. "Eddie, I have to ask, are you sure about these photos and documents?" "Completely sure. I can prove Julie was planning this divorce for months while I was overseas, and I can prove she systematically removed property from our house without my knowledge or consent." "And you're certain about the timeline?" "The photos are time-stamped, the bank records show when the money was moved, and I have witness statements about when the moving truck showed up." Jim nodded slowly. "This could actually work in your favor. If we can prove premeditation and deliberate concealment of assets, the judge might be very interested in hearing your side of the story." "What about the adultery angle?" "Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, so the affair itself doesn't matter legally. But the deception and asset concealment definitely matter, especially if we can show she was using marital funds to support her relationship with this Chad character." I left Jim's office feeling better about the legal side of things, but I wasn't planning to rely entirely on the courts. Julie had played dirty, and she was about to learn that I could play the same game. My next stop was the local newspaper office. The Herald was a small weekly paper, but it covered local business news and social events religiously. I asked to speak with the editor about a potential story. "I'm Eddie Banks. I run Banks Classic Auto. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in a story about marriage fraud in the local real estate industry." The editor, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol Stevens, looked intrigued. "What kind of fraud?" "The kind where someone uses their position in the real estate community to identify and target wealthy clients for personal relationships, then systematically defrauds their spouses." I showed her some of the documentation I'd gathered, being careful not to reveal everything at once. Carol's eyes widened as she reviewed the timeline and evidence. "This is quite a story, Mr. Banks, but I'd need to verify everything independently before we could publish anything." "Of course, I'm just saying it might be worth investigating whether this is an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern." I left Carol with copies of some of the less sensitive documents and my contact information. Even if she didn't publish a story immediately, word would spread through the local media community that someone was asking questions about Julie and Chad. That afternoon, I drove to Chad's condo building downtown. It was an expensive high-rise with a doorman and valet parking, the kind of place that catered to people who wanted everyone to know they had money. I parked across the street and waited. Around 5:30, Chad's Porsche pulled up to the valet stand. He got out, tossed his keys to the attendant, and walked into the building like he owned the world. 20 minutes later, Julie arrived in a car I didn't recognize, a new BMW sedan that probably cost more than most people made in a year. She handed her keys to the same valet and followed Chad's path into the building. I took photos of both cars and their license plates, then settled in to wait. If Julie was living with Chad, she'd probably stay the night. But if she was still maintaining the pretense of living somewhere else, she might leave later. While I waited, I called Manny. "How's the research going?" "Good news and bad news. The good news is that Chad Foster has a reputation for being careless with his personal life. The bad news is that he's also got connections throughout the local government and business community. What kind of connections? His company has done renovation work for half the city council members, and he's a regular contributor to local political campaigns. If this turns into a public fight, he's going to have people in his corner. What about Julie? Her real estate agency is well regarded, and she's got a clean professional reputation. But I talked to a guy who works in the mortgage industry, and he said there have been some questions about her client relationships. What kind of questions? The kind where attractive female agents develop very close relationships with wealthy male clients. Nothing provable, but enough to make people wonder. That was interesting. If Julie had a pattern of using her looks and charm to manipulate clients, it would support my theory that she'd been planning her exit strategy for longer than anyone realized. Keep digging. I want to know everything about both of them. I hung up and continued watching the condo building. Around 9 o'clock, Julie emerged alone and got into her BMW. I followed at a distance as she drove across town to a different upscale complex. Apparently she was maintaining her own place, as well as spending time at Chad's. The next morning, I implemented the second phase of my plan. I drove to the storage facility and used Tommy's lock-jamming technique to ensure that Julie would have problems accessing Unit 47B. Then I visited several local pawn shops and used car lots, asking if anyone had tried to sell tools or car parts matching the description of my stolen items. The third shop I visited, Murphy's Used Auto Parts, hit pay dirt. "Yeah, I remember that transaction," Murphy said, consulting his records. "Young woman came in about 3 months ago with a bunch of vintage Mustang parts. Said her husband was overseas and asked her to sell them." "Do you still have the parts?" "Some of them. The rare stuff sold quick, but I've got some of the more common pieces in the back." Murphy showed me a collection of parts that I recognized immediately. Chrome trim pieces, interior components, and engine accessories I'd been collecting for years. The total value was probably close to $3,000, but Murphy had paid Julie less than $500. "I don't suppose you kept a record of who bought the rare pieces?" "Matter of fact, I did. Most of them went to collectors who are regular customers. I could probably track them down if you need me to." I thanked Murphy and bought back my own parts at his asking price. It was frustrating to pay twice for things I already owned, but I needed the documentation to prove what Julie had done. My phone rang as I was loading the parts into my truck. It was Carol Stevens from the newspaper. "Mr. Banks, I've been doing some research on your story. Are you available to meet this afternoon? I think you'll be interested in what I've found." We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from both the newspaper office and my usual haunts. Carol had a thick folder of papers and a serious expression. "Eddie, I think your situation might be more complicated than you realize. I've been looking into Chad Foster's business practices, and there are some interesting patterns." She spread several documents across the table. Foster Development Group has been involved in at least 6 divorce proceedings over the past 3 years. In each case, Chad purchased property from women who were going through divorces, usually at below-market prices. He's targeting divorced women? It looks that way. And in at least 2 cases, the women were his clients' wives, women he met through his real estate connections. Carol showed me more documentation. Here's the interesting part. In 4 of those 6 cases, the women filed for divorce within 6 months of meeting Chad. And in every case, they sold property to his company at prices that were significantly below market value. I studied the papers, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. So, Chad's not just stealing wives, he's running a real estate scam. That's what it looks like. He identifies women in unhappy marriages, particularly women with valuable property, and manipulates them into leaving their husbands and selling to his company. What about Julie? That's where it gets really interesting. Your wife doesn't fit the usual pattern. She doesn't own significant property, and her income is actually higher than most of Chad's previous targets. So why would he be interested in her? Carol smiled grimly. Because she brings something different to the table. She's a real estate agent with access to client information and upcoming divorce proceedings. She's not just a victim, she's a potential partner. The implications hit me like a truck. Julie wasn't just another woman Chad had seduced and manipulated. She was actively helping him identify and target other couples for his real estate scam. Can you prove this? I'm working on it, but I thought you should know what you're really dealing with here. This isn't just about your marriage, it's about a systematic fraud operation that's been targeting families throughout the area. I thanked Carol and drove back to my shop, my mind racing. Julie hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd become part of a criminal enterprise. And if I could prove it, I wouldn't just get my revenge, I'd be protecting other families from becoming victims. Manny was waiting when I arrived, along with Tommy and another man I didn't recognize. Eddie, this is Detective Ray Sullivan. He's retired now, but he used to work financial crimes for the state police. I thought you might want to talk to him. Sullivan was a thin, gray-haired man with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet intensity that comes from years of investigating complex cases. Manny told me about your situation, Eddie. I've been doing some informal research and I think you might be sitting on something bigger than a simple divorce case. How much bigger? Big enough that the FBI might be interested. If Chad Foster is running a systematic fraud operation using real estate transactions to launder money and manipulate divorce proceedings, that's federal territory. Sullivan showed me a chart he'd created, mapping out the connections between Chad's business deals and the divorce cases Carol had identified. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Foster identifies targets, initiates relationships, manipulates them into filing for divorce, then purchases their property at below-market prices. But he's also been flipping those properties to out-of-state buyers at inflated prices, which suggests possible money laundering. And Julie's role? She provides access to client information and helps identify potential targets. She also legitimizes the real estate transactions by handling the paperwork through her agency. I stared at the chart, realizing that my wife hadn't just left me for another man. She'd left me to become a criminal, and she'd used our marriage and my overseas absence as cover for her activities. What do I need to do? Document everything. Gather every piece of evidence you can find, and be very careful. If they realize you're onto their operation, they might try to discredit you, or worse. Sullivan gave me his contact information and promised to help however he could. After he left, I sat in my shop with Manny and Tommy, planning the next phase of my campaign. "This changes everything," Manny said. "We're not just getting revenge on a cheating wife, we're taking down a criminal operation." "Yeah, but we have to be smart about it. If we move too fast or too obviously, they'll destroy evidence and disappear." Tommy looked up from his laptop. "I might be able to help with that. I've been monitoring Julie's social media and email accounts, and I've noticed some interesting patterns in her communications." He showed us a series of emails between Julie and various clients, discussing property valuations and divorce proceedings. Look at this one from last month. Julie's telling a client that her husband's business is worth less than it actually is, and suggesting she should sell quickly to avoid complications. "And look at this," Tommy continued, pulling up another email. Julie's forwarding confidential client information to an email address that belongs to Chad's company. We spent the next hour reviewing Tommy's findings, and the scope of Julie and Chad's operation became clear. They weren't just targeting random couples. They were systematically identifying and manipulating Julie's real estate clients, using her access to confidential information to orchestrate divorces and property transfers that benefited Chad's company. "How many couples do you think they've targeted?" I asked. "Based on what I can see, at least a dozen over the past 2 years, and the total value of the property transfers is probably close to $2 million. I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. Julie and Chad hadn't just destroyed my marriage, they'd been destroying families throughout the community, stealing homes and savings from people who trusted Julie to represent their interests. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd targeted someone who knew how to fight back. The war was about to begin. The next morning, I started applying pressure in ways Julie and Chad wouldn't expect. My first move was to visit the Massachusetts Real Estate Board and file a formal complaint against Julie for violating client confidentiality and engaging in conflicts of interest. The complaint was detailed and well documented, thanks to Tommy's research and the emails we'd discovered. I provided evidence that Julie had been sharing confidential client information with Chad's company and actively working against her client's interests in divorce proceedings. "This is quite serious, Mr. Banks," said the investigator who reviewed my complaint. "If these allegations are substantiated, Ms. Banks could face suspension or revocation of her real estate license." "I understand. I just want to make sure other families don't go through what I've experienced." My second move was to visit Chad's bank. I didn't have enough information to file formal complaints yet, but I could ask questions that would trigger their internal compliance reviews. "I'm concerned about some unusual real estate transactions involving Foster Development Group," I told the bank manager. "Specifically, transactions where properties are being purchased at below-market prices from women going through divorces, then immediately resold at inflated values." The manager took notes and promised to review Chad's accounts for any irregularities. Even if they didn't find anything immediately, the inquiry would be noted in Chad's file and might complicate future transactions. While I was making official complaints, Manny was working his network of contacts throughout the construction and real estate industries. By noon, he had some interesting intelligence. "Chad's got problems," Manny reported when I returned to the shop. 3 of his recent renovation projects have failed inspection, and there are rumors that he's been cutting corners to maximize profits. "What kind of problems?" "Electrical work that doesn't meet code, plumbing that's already failing, foundation issues that weren't properly addressed. The kind of problems that could result in serious lawsuits if buyers figure out they've been cheated." "Any chance we could help them figure it out?" Manny grinned. "I might know some people who could point buyers in the right direction. Just being neighborly." While Manny worked on that angle, I drove to the storage facility to check on Unit 47B. As expected, the lock had been broken and replaced with a heavy-duty padlock. Julie had discovered my little modification and wasn't taking any chances. But I'd anticipated this. Instead of trying to break in again, I set up a small surveillance camera in the bushes across from the unit. If Julie or Chad came back, I'd know about it. My phone rang as I was adjusting the camera angle. It was Carol Stevens from the newspaper. "Eddie, I've got some news. I've been in contact with 2 of the women who sold property to Chad's company, and they're willing to talk." "What are they saying?" "Exactly what we suspected. Both women say Chad pursued them romantically while they were going through difficult periods in their marriages. He convinced them that their husbands were holding them back and that they deserved better. And then? And then he helped them file for divorce and offered to buy their property as a favor to help them start fresh. Both women realized later that they'd sold for significantly less than market value. Are they willing to go on record? One of them is. The other is scared. Apparently, Chad made some threats when she started asking questions about the sale price. This was exactly what I needed. Independent confirmation that Chad's operation was systematic and that he was using intimidation to keep victims quiet. "Carol, I think it's time to involve law enforcement. I've been working with a retired detective, and he thinks the FBI might be interested in this case." "I agree. But Eddie, you need to be careful. If Chad realizes how much evidence we've gathered, he might try to destroy records or intimidate witnesses. Let him try. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago." That afternoon, I met with Detective Sullivan and Carol Stevens at a restaurant outside of town. We spread our evidence across a corner table and began building a comprehensive case against Chad and Julie's operation. "The pattern is clear," Sullivan said, reviewing the documentation. "Foster and your wife have been running a sophisticated fraud scheme targeting vulnerable couples. The real estate transactions are just the tip of the iceberg. What else are you seeing? Money laundering, tax evasion, possibly racketeering if we can prove this is an ongoing criminal enterprise. The total value of the fraudulent transactions is well over the threshold for federal prosecution." Carol looked up from her notes. I've been researching Chad's background, and there are some interesting gaps in his history. He moved to Massachusetts 3 years ago from Florida, but I can't find any record of his business activities there. That's not uncommon for someone trying to escape scrutiny, Sullivan observed. Florida has been cracking down on real estate fraud, so a lot of operators have moved to states with less aggressive enforcement. So what's our next move? Sullivan pulled out his phone. I'm going to call a friend at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. With this much evidence, they'll definitely want to open an investigation. While Sullivan made his call, I reviewed the timeline we'd constructed. Julie and Chad's operation had been running for almost 2 years, systematically targeting couples throughout the region. They'd stolen homes, destroyed marriages, and traumatized families, all while presenting themselves as respected members of the business community. But their biggest mistake had been targeting me. Unlike their previous victims, I had the resources, connections, and motivation to fight back effectively. Sullivan returned from his phone call with good news. Agent Sarah Martinez from the Boston FBI office wants to meet with us tomorrow morning. She's very interested in what we've uncovered. What should I expect? She'll want to review all our evidence and probably ask you to cooperate in an undercover operation. If Julie and Chad are still actively targeting victims, the FBI might want to catch them in the act. The idea of working undercover against my own wife was surreal, but I was committed to seeing this through. Julie had made her choice when she decided to become a criminal. Now, she'd have to face the consequences. That evening, I drove past Chad's condo building and noticed something interesting. Julie's BMW wasn't in the valet area, but there was a different car, a red Mercedes convertible that I didn't recognize. I parked across the street and waited. Around 8 o'clock, Chad emerged from the building with a woman who definitely wasn't Julie. She was younger, blonde, and wearing expensive clothes that suggested she had money to spend. I took photos as Chad and the mystery woman got into his Porsche and drove away. Then I followed them to an upscale restaurant downtown, where they were seated at an intimate corner table. This was very interesting. If Chad was already working on his next target while still involved with Julie, it suggested that their relationship was more business than romance. It also meant that Julie might not be as secure in her position as she thought. I called Manny from the parking lot. I need you to run a license plate for me. Red Mercedes convertible, Massachusetts plates. I gave him the number. Give me 10 minutes. While I waited, I watched Chad and his dinner companion through the restaurant window. They were sitting close together, and Chad was using the same charm offensive I'd probably used on Julie years ago. The woman seemed receptive, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm frequently. Manny called back with the information. The Mercedes is registered to Patricia Hendricks, age 34, address in Newton. According to my guy at the DMV, she's listed as divorced, and the car was purchased 6 months ago. Newton was an expensive suburb, and a 6-month-old Mercedes suggested that Patricia Hendricks had significant assets. If Chad was targeting her, it meant he was already planning his next move while still extracting value from his relationship with Julie. I took more photos of Chad and Patricia together, then drove home to my empty house. Tomorrow's meeting with the FBI would determine whether I was going to get justice through the legal system or whether I'd need to take more direct action. Either way, Julie and Chad's operation was about to come to an end. I spent the evening organizing all our evidence into a comprehensive file. Photos, documents, witness statements, financial records, and timelines. Everything the FBI would need to build a case against Julie and Chad. But I also prepared a backup plan. If the federal investigation moved too slowly, or if Julie and Chad tried to flee, I had enough evidence to destroy their reputations and business relationships immediately. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I smiled and typed back. Too late for threats. The hole is already dug. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. The FBI field office in Boston was located in a modern glass building that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a law enforcement facility. Agent Sarah Martinez met us in the lobby, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen every kind of financial fraud imaginable. "Mr. Banks, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence Detective Sullivan provided, and I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen in years." We were escorted to a conference room where Martinez had already laid out charts and timelines based on our documentation. The scope of Julie and Chad's operation was even more extensive than I'd realized. "We've identified at least 15 couples who appear to have been targeted by Foster and your wife over the past 2 years," Martinez explained. "The total value of fraudulent transactions exceeds $4 million. $4 million? I was stunned by the scale. Foster's operation is sophisticated. He identifies targets through your wife's real estate connections, manipulates them into filing for divorce, purchases their property at below-market prices, then resells to out-of-state buyers at inflated values. The profits are laundered through a network of shell companies." Martinez showed us a complex chart mapping out Chad's business relationships. "We've been tracking similar operations in Florida and North Carolina. Foster appears to be part of a larger network of real estate fraudsters who move from state to state when law enforcement gets too close." "What about Julie's role?" "She's more than just a recruiter. Her real estate license gives her access to confidential client information, and she's been actively manipulating property valuations to facilitate the fraud. She's also been filing false reports with mortgage companies and insurance providers." Detective Sullivan leaned forward. "So we're talking about federal charges?" "Multiple federal charges: mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. If we can prove the full scope of the operation, Foster and your wife could be looking at 20 years in federal prison." The room was quiet for a moment as the implications sank in. Julie hadn't just cheated on me. She'd become a career criminal who was facing decades in prison. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "We want you to continue gathering evidence, but with federal oversight. We'll provide you with recording equipment and surveillance support. If Foster or your wife contact you directly, we want those conversations documented." "Are you asking me to go undercover?" "Not exactly. We want you to be yourself, the wronged husband who's asking questions and making noise. But we want to monitor their responses and gather evidence of their attempts to intimidate or silence you." Martinez handed me a small device that looked like a regular cell phone. "This will record all your conversations and transmit them directly to our surveillance team. We'll also be monitoring your location for your safety." "You think they might try to hurt me?" "Foster has a history of intimidating witnesses. In Florida, 2 people who tried to expose his operation received threats serious enough to require police protection." That explained the anonymous text message I'd received the night before. Chad was already trying to scare me into backing down. "What about the other victims? Are you going to warn them?" "We're in the process of contacting everyone we've identified. Some of them will be willing to cooperate with the investigation. Others might be too intimidated or embarrassed to come forward." Martinez pulled out another folder. "There's something else you should know. We've been monitoring Foster's communications, and it appears he's planning to leave Massachusetts within the next few weeks." "He's running?" "He's relocating his operation. We've intercepted communications suggesting he's already established business relationships in Texas and Arizona. If we don't move quickly, he'll disappear and start the same scam in a new location." "What about Julie?" "That's unclear. She might be going with him, or she might be planning her own exit strategy. Either way, we need to accelerate our timeline." I left the FBI office with a new sense of urgency. Julie and Chad weren't just criminals. They were flight risks who might disappear before facing justice for what they'd done. My first stop was the newspaper office, where Carol Stevens was preparing her story for publication. "The FBI confirmed everything we suspected," I told her. "But they also said Chad might be planning to leave town soon." "How soon?" Within weeks, maybe sooner, if he realizes how much evidence we've gathered. Carol looked at her computer screen, where she'd been working on the article. I can have this ready for publication by tomorrow morning. Once it hits the streets, Chad and Julie won't be able to operate in this town anymore. Do it. The more pressure we put on them, the more likely they are to make mistakes. From the newspaper office, I drove to my shop, where Manny and Tommy were waiting with more intelligence. We've been monitoring Chad's business activities, Tommy reported. He's been liquidating assets and closing accounts. Yesterday, he sold 3 properties to a company in Texas for cash. He's definitely preparing to run, Manny added. My contact at the moving company says Foster Development Group has reserved a truck for next week. What about Julie? That's where it gets interesting, Tommy said, pulling up his laptop. Julie's been having some problems of her own. Her real estate agency received several complaints this week about her handling of client accounts. Tommy showed me a series of emails between Julie and her boss at the agency. The tone was increasingly hostile, with Julie's supervisor questioning her recent business practices and demanding explanations for several questionable transactions. It looks like Julie's about to lose her job, Tommy observed, which means she's about to lose her access to client information. And her value to Chad's operation, I added. My phone rang. It was Agent Martinez. Eddie, we've had a development. Foster just purchased airline tickets to Dallas for this Friday. 2 tickets. 2 tickets? Foster and someone named Patricia Hendricks. Does that name mean anything to you? I thought about the blonde woman I'd seen Chad with at the restaurant. I think that's his next target. I saw them together last night. Or his next partner. We're running a background check on Hendricks now. But Eddie, this changes our timeline. If Foster is leaving Friday, we need to move this week. What do you want me to do? We want you to confront them directly, force them to react while we're monitoring the situation. Can you arrange a meeting with your wife? I think so. But what about my safety? We'll have surveillance teams in position. You'll be protected. After Martinez hung up, I sat in my shop planning my next move. Julie and Chad thought they were in control of the situation, but they were about to discover that their victims could fight back. I called Julie's cell phone. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cold and professional. What do you want, Eddie? I want to meet with you and Chad tomorrow night. There are some things we need to discuss. We have nothing to discuss. My lawyer will handle everything. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. It concerns your business activities with Chad and some information that might interest the authorities. There was a long pause. What kind of information? The kind that could complicate your future plans. Meet me at Donovan's bar tomorrow at 8, both of you. And if we don't? Then you'll read about it in the newspaper on Thursday morning. I hung up before she could respond. The trap was set. Now I just had to survive long enough to spring it. Wednesday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill in the air, as if the weather itself was anticipating the storm about to break. I arrived at Donovan's bar 30 minutes early, wearing the FBI's recording device and knowing that Agent Martinez's surveillance team was already in position. The bar was moderately busy with the usual after-work crowd, but I'd specifically chosen a corner table that would give me a clear view of the entrance while keeping my back to a wall. Old habits from my Navy days. Never sit where someone can approach you from behind. Julie and Chad arrived exactly at 8, and I had to admit they made an impressive couple. Julie wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and Chad was dressed in an expensive suit that screamed success and confidence. They looked like they belonged in this upscale establishment, like they were the kind of people who never faced real consequences for their actions. They were about to learn otherwise. Julie slid into the seat across from me while Chad remained standing, trying to use his height to intimidate. It was a classic power play, but I'd faced down much more dangerous men than Chad Foster. You look good, Julie. Crime seems to agree with you. Her composure slipped slightly. I don't know what you think you know, Eddie, but... I know about the storage unit. I know about the systematic theft of my property. I know about your little real estate scam with Chad here. And I know about the 15 families you've defrauded over the past 2 years. Chad finally sat down, his face pale. You don't have any proof of anything. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of the documents I'd found in the storage unit. Actually, I have quite a bit of proof. Love letters, financial records, client information that was supposed to be confidential. You two have been very careless with your record keeping. Those documents were obtained illegally, Julie said, but her voice lacked conviction. Were they? I retrieved my own property from a storage unit that was paid for with my money. Everything else was just sitting there in plain sight. I signaled the waitress and ordered a beer, taking my time to let the tension build. Julie and Chad exchanged worried glances, and I could see them trying to figure out how much I actually knew. Here's what's going to happen, I continued once the waitress left. You're going to return every item you stole from me, along with compensation for the items you've already sold. You're going to dissolve your fraudulent business partnership, and you're going to make restitution to every family you've cheated. Chad laughed, but it sounded forced. Or what? Or tomorrow morning, the Herald publishes a detailed article about your real estate fraud operation. By Friday, the FBI will have enough evidence to file federal charges against both of you. The color drained from Julie's face. The FBI? They're very interested in your activities, Julie. Turns out that using your real estate license to defraud clients is a federal crime. Who knew? Chad leaned forward aggressively. You're bluffing. You don't have anything the FBI would care about. I pulled out another photo on my phone, this one showing Chad and Patricia Hendricks at dinner the previous night. What about your new girlfriend, Chad? Does she know she's your next target? Or does she think you actually care about her? Chad's aggressive posture collapsed. How did you... I've been watching you, Chad. Both of you. I know about Patricia Hendricks, I know about your plane tickets to Dallas, and I know you've been liquidating assets all week. Running away won't solve your problems. Julie was staring at the photo of Chad with another woman, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. She wasn't Chad's partner. She was just another victim who'd outlived her usefulness. You're leaving with her, Julie said to Chad, her voice barely above a whisper. Julie, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You used me to set up your operation here, and now you're moving on to the next city with a new partner. The dynamic at the table had shifted completely. Instead of two criminals united against me, I was watching their partnership collapse in real time. How long have you been planning this, Chad? I asked. How long have you been setting Julie up to take the fall while you escaped to Texas? Chad didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Julie's face went through a range of emotions, betrayal, anger, and finally a cold calculation that I recognized from our marriage. You bastard, she said to Chad. You told me we were partners. You said we'd build something together. We did build something, and now it's time to move on. Julie turned to me, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married 8 years ago, before the greed and ambition had corrupted her. Eddie, Save it, Julie. You made your choice when you decided to steal from me and destroy other families. Now you get to live with the consequences. I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Make restitution and face the music, or run and spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Julie's voice rise behind me. Chad, you can't just leave me here to deal with this alone. Watch me, Chad replied. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, knowing that the FBI's surveillance team had recorded every word of the conversation. Julie and Chad's criminal partnership was dissolving, and they were about to turn on each other. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez. Excellent work. We have everything we need. But as I walked to my truck, I realized that the evening wasn't over yet. Through the bar's window, I could see Julie and Chad in an increasingly heated argument. Julie was gesturing angrily while Chad sat with his arms crossed, looking like a man who'd already mentally left town. Suddenly, Julie stood up and stormed out of the bar, brushing past me without making eye contact. Chad followed a few seconds later, catching up with her in the parking lot. "Julie, be reasonable. The operation here is finished. We need to cut our losses and move on." "We? There is no we, Chad. You're abandoning me just like you've abandoned every other woman who helped build your business." "That's not true. I'm offering you a chance to come with me to Dallas. We can start fresh." Julie laughed bitterly. "With Patricia Hendricks? I don't think so. Patricia is just business, you know that. Patricia is your next victim, and I'm yesterday's news. I understand the pattern now, Chad. I just never thought I'd be on the receiving end of it." Chad grabbed Julie's arm, and his voice took on a threatening tone. "You need to be very careful about what you say and do over the next few days, Julie. We both have a lot to lose if this situation gets out of control." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm reminding you that we're in this together. If I go down, you go down with me." Julie jerked her arm free. "No, Chad. If you go down alone. I'm done being your partner." She got into her BMW and drove away, leaving Chad standing alone in the parking lot. He stood there for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested he was making arrangements, probably accelerating his departure plans. My phone rang. Agent Martinez again. "Eddie, we monitored the parking lot conversation. Foster just made a call to someone, possibly arranging to leave town earlier than planned. We're going to move on him tonight." "What about Julie?" "She's a flight risk too, but based on what we just heard, she might be willing to cooperate if it means avoiding federal charges." "You want me to approach her?" "Not yet. Let us handle the arrest, but be ready. If Foster tries to flee or if your wife decides to run, we might need your help tracking them down." I drove home to my empty house and waited. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a news alert. "Local real estate developer arrested on federal fraud charges." The article was brief, but it confirmed that Chad Foster had been taken into custody at his condo building while attempting to leave with several suitcases and a large amount of cash. Julie's fate remained unclear, but I suspected she'd be facing her own federal charges within days. I poured myself a drink and sat in my empty living room, thinking about the events of the past week. 7 days ago, I'd been a man who'd lost everything to his wife's betrayal. Tonight, I was the catalyst for bringing down a criminal operation that had destroyed dozens of families. It wasn't the revenge I'd originally planned, but it was far more satisfying than anything I could have imagined. My phone rang one final time. It was Julie. "Eddie, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me?" "I think you should be talking to a lawyer, Julie. Please. Just give me 10 minutes. There are things you need to know." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at an all-night diner across town. When I arrived, she was sitting in a back booth, looking like a woman who'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. "Chad's been arrested," she said without preamble. "I heard. The FBI came to my apartment an hour ago. They have a warrant for my arrest, too." "Are you turning yourself in?" "I don't know. Maybe. Eddie, I need you to understand something. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen, Julie?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her untouched coffee. "I never meant to hurt you. When I met Chad, I thought I was just having an affair. I didn't know about his business until I was already in too deep. But you stayed involved. You helped him target other families. By then, he had evidence of my involvement. He said if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I went to prison while he disappeared." I studied her face, trying to determine if she was telling the truth or just trying to manipulate me one more time. "So, you're saying you were a victim too?" "In a way, yes. But I'm also guilty of terrible things, Eddie. I betrayed you. I betrayed my clients. I helped destroy families. I don't expect forgiveness. What do you expect? I don't know. Maybe just the chance to make things right before I face whatever's coming. Julie reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is a list of everyone Chad targeted, along with documentation of how much money was stolen from each family. The FBI will get this information eventually, but this might help them recover assets more quickly. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're the only person I trust to make sure it gets to the right people, and because I owe you more than I can ever repay. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside were the details of dozens of lives that had been shattered by Julie and Chad's greed. There's something else, Julie continued. Chad has accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The FBI probably doesn't know about them yet, but the account numbers are in that envelope. The money in those accounts belongs to the families we cheated. How much money? Over $2 million. Chad was planning to access those accounts from Dallas and disappear permanently. I realized that Julie was giving me the tools to recover money that might otherwise be lost forever. It was perhaps the first genuinely selfless thing she'd done in years. What happens to you now? I'm going to turn myself in tomorrow morning. My lawyer thinks I might be able to negotiate a plea deal if I cooperate fully with the investigation. And then? And then I'll probably spend the next few years in federal prison, thinking about all the lives I helped destroy. We sat in silence for a few minutes, two people who'd once promised to love each other forever, now sitting across from each other as strangers. For what it's worth, Eddie, I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for what I became. You deserved better. Yes, I did. Julie stood up and put on her coat. Take care of yourself, Eddie, and thank you for giving me the chance to do one thing right. She walked out of the diner and into the night, leaving me alone with an envelope full of evidence that would help bring justice to the families she and Chad had victimized. I sat there for another hour, processing everything that had happened. 7 days ago, I'd returned from Germany to find my life destroyed. Tonight, I was holding the key to rebuilding the lives of dozens of other people who'd been victimized by the same criminals who'd targeted me. It wasn't the ending I'd expected, but it was the ending that mattered. Tomorrow, I'd deliver Julie's evidence to the FBI and help them recover the stolen money. The families who'd been cheated would get their assets back, and justice would be served. As for me, I'd learned something important. Revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure the people who hurt you can't hurt anyone else. I drove home through the empty streets, already planning how to rebuild my life from the ashes of Julie's betrayal. I had my shop, my friends, and most importantly, I had the satisfaction of knowing that I'd fought back and won. The war was over, and for the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow.